Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. Guest today, if you want to introduce yourself, just let us know where you're calling in from, first of all, and what you do for a living with Takasa.
My name is Kuljit Rakhra, out here in Vancouver, BC, Canada, and I'm the co-founder and COO of Takasa.co. We are Canada's first organic and fair trade homewares brand. We make basically bed and bath linens from non-toxic, like sort of clean cotton. So there's no toxic chemicals going in any sort of our processes or growing, so it protects not only the end consumer, but also protects the farmers and the processors and planet Earth itself without having any of these harmful chemicals going into the soil or into our bodies.
That's awesome. I love that. And could you tell me a little bit about your background? I mean, what got you interested in, founding a business in this kind of space with, this type of product? And what was I guess kind of just also walk me up to, what was your big catalyst from taking this to an idea and a problem that you found to actually launching a full-blown business this way?
Yeah, so I'm actually a former banker. Right out of university, actually while I was in university, worked for a bank, went through a 20-year career in banking, which involved about 18 different roles. But near the end of it, it was sort of, for the past 10 years, my wife and I, who's my partner in this, we're talking a lot about different business ideas. We did a home renovation. And when we were going through that process, we sort of looked at how do we make things cleaner and greener while we're doing those renovations? And then we started looking at the outside materials, but on the inside as well. And we're like, okay, we spend a lot of time in the living room and we spend a lot of time in the bedroom. And we figured, those are the spots where you really want to make sure that we have 3 kids. We want to make sure they're not being exposed to anything that's bad for them. You read labels, start doing that kind of stuff. And the bedroom was one of the areas where we started investing in, mattresses and furniture and bedding that were organic. And that was actually, we lived in Chicago before. We moved back to Canada, out in Vancouver. We realized there's a gap. There was no Canadian brand that was certified for either organic textiles or fair trade cotton. And, that was one of the gaps that we saw. And we were like, oh, this needs to be done. So we created Takasa to fill that void up in the Great North here so that we can help Canadian consumers who are conscious about their health and also just about, being more aware of what's going on in the environment.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I love that story because so many people that come on the podcast, I hear their backstories about how they come up with a specific idea and what kind of led them to wanting to actually put 2 feet in and really, create a brand in these types of areas. And it's almost never, I did 20 years in working a bedding factory or something. It's never anywhere close, it seems, ever. It's just a real problem that you've really affected your life and is affecting others as well. So what did you kind of find? I mean, you started doing research into this area. What are some of the main, bad chemicals and things that are used in more traditional, maybe bedding that you wanted to get away from? I mean, I don't think this is something that's really talked about in the public light enough. I mean, with food, certainly, but with bedding and apparel and stuff, I don't think it's something that's talked about enough. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's exactly the same chemicals that actually go into farming for any fruit, vegetable, or any plant, right? So there's a lot of pesticides that are out there. And what you don't realize is the skin is your largest organ, right? So it's exposed to everything. We're wearing shirts, we're wearing everything else. We're sleeping in beds, we're using towels, all that kind of stuff impacts your skin. And what we realize is all these chemicals formaldehyde's a big one. And there's a lot of pesticides out there that are just embedded in our bedding and our bath towels and everything else that we use. A lot of the bigger sort of chains and a lot of the bigger companies, they use artificial softeners as well that are heavily chemically treated. And while some of them may not be harmful to people's skin, they're harmful to the people making it, right? So it's you got to balance off what's good for the end consumer with what's actually good for the people making the product as well.
That's so true. And that's also something I don't think is talked about enough when you talk about sustainability, or a lot of people that come on the podcast, I think just coincidentally recently we've had a lot of conversations about upcycling and how that not only affects, the end consumer using upcycled materials, whether it's in bedding or whether it's in food, everybody along the way. And I think it's really important for people to know the stories of brands like yours, because I think it invites others to also take on the challenge to figure out logistically, how to make sustainable businesses successful. So can you also expand on that a little bit? And obviously there's challenges. It probably took you a little bit longer to find the right producers and things for your materials, and even manufacturers that are going to do things the way that it's the right way to be done. So how do you kind of grapple with some of those things and still have a successful business while having to maybe jump through a few extra hoops to make sure everything is sustainable and doing it the right way.
It's a big challenge. Doing things the right way is not only harder. So organic and fair trade cotton makes up less than 1% of the cotton that's grown.
That's fascinating, actually.
Right. So it's a really small percentage. So it's harder to find it. Since there's less of it, it tends to be more expensive. When you have some of the bigger companies in the US who are, competitors of ours, but people who are making organic and fair trade more sort of mainstream, it helps us because then more cotton farmers are being encouraged to grow organic cotton. And I'm heavily involved in fair trade as well. Actually, the vice chair of Fair Trade Canada.
Well, that's awesome.
And so, while a lot of people don't think of farming as fair trade, but that's really where it comes from, right? So it's about helping farmers, the main producers of our produce, of our cotton, of our sort of agriculture, helping them really do things in a better way. So again, the challenge is there's not as many farmers doing organic and fair trade farming. There's not as many processors then. So everything becomes a little bit more expensive. The good thing is they keep an eye on everything, right? So they're very forward. They're very sort of trying to figure out better ways of growing their market as well. And so when they find companies like ours, or when we approach them, they're very approachable. They're very open to saying, hey, here's what we do. Here's what's good. Here's what's bad. This is how we're going to help you. You just have to go out like any other business and really dig into where you want to get your stuff from. Once you find that manufacturer, call them, talk to them, like more than just an email. We actually went out and visited 8 different places in India.
Oh, wow.
Where we sort of factories and companies and sort of made connections with them then. This was like 2019 pre-pandemic. So it's just at that, area where it's really easy to get out there and do that. And then there's a few years we haven't been able to go back, but we plan on going back next year to visit the same factories, but also some new ones to see who else we can sort of work with.
Yeah, that's amazing. And obviously in the space with bedding, I mean, the big box stores kind of just the same, like, song and dance, people looking for $20, $30 sheets. This is the cheapest thing they can get their hands on sometimes. So tell me a little bit about, how you kind of identify, target market with something like this. Obviously it's a sustainable product, but it's definitely a premium product too, right? So tell me a little bit about, how you imagine your kind of avatar ideal customer and, selling something like this.
Yeah. So at the beginning, when we first started, we kind of had an idea, it was the LOHA segment, which is the lifestyle of the healthy and sustainable, but we really kind of sprayed and prayed. Didn't really have a set strategy in place of like who our avatar was other than the LOHA segment. We knew, hey, there's people out there who are into healthy living. Let's try to attract them. As we've matured as a company and we've talked to more of our customers. So we actually got on the phone, called our top 10 customers, found out why they bought from us, what were the reasons, what magazines do they read, what TV shows do they watch. So we found out more about our top customers, what they do, why they bought from us, what were the main reasons. And what we found out was a lot of them were in that sort of either went through some sort of health issue or had family members that went through health issues. And because of that, started changing their habits towards what they were eating and what they were using in their home. And that's how they found us, because they're like, hey, you guys were the only ones doing organic and fair trade sheets in Canada. The sustainability aspect was a big one for them, but the main one was their own health and safety.
That's really interesting. So you found basically people were not being as proactive with making a change in something as much as they found that like there was a problem that now is like they're being proactive at post issue, really more than like being proactive on the front end just for the sake of being proactive and learning about.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's common with a lot of things, right? We all know we shouldn't smoke, we shouldn't drink, we shouldn't do a lot of things. Yeah. But it's not until something really affects your health that you're like, oh, wait a minute, I should stop doing this, right?
No, exactly. That makes a lot of sense. And as far as like I guess more like demographic, just like age range, I'm curious. I mean, a lot of these growing brands that I talk to, they're usually in like trying to target millennials or like older Gen Zs, because it's just like it's more impressionable generations that seem to be more open to getting away from the more traditional big box brands and things like that they've used forever. So is that kind of a similar age range you find, or is it maybe a little bit older than that?
No, we tend to skew a little bit older. We do have that.
That makes sense.
Yeah. We tend to like the Zennials / sort of and older, right? Yeah. They've sort of been through some issues now. They have kids, so they're taking a little bit more cautious. Some of them have grandkids, so they're taking a little bit more sort of awareness of what's going on in the world. And they're like, and also our price point is a little bit higher, right? I think if we were at a sub $100 product, it might be a little bit more approachable for younger folks. But our average sheet set is about $280, so it makes it a little bit more expensive for folks.
Right. Yeah. No, that definitely makes sense. And so tell me a little bit more about like the product itself, right? So you have this price point. Two things that come with it are, obviously you're buying something that's sustainable, that isn't going to have harmful chemicals in it. I find people making these types of products, there's usually some type of enhanced longevity with those types of things too, because those chemicals over time, they'll break down your skin. That's why it's bad for your skin, but also can break down the material in and of itself that it's treated with. So how do you kind of find the lifetime value of one of your products versus something that's maybe just like a super cheap, $20-$30 sheet set that you get at any of the big box stores?
Yeah. So again, it's natural cotton. It's not chemically sort of enhanced or chemically degraded in any way. And they're woven in a very special way using amazing German machines. So yeah, they tend to be a little bit more durable. They get softer with each wash. So right out of the sort of bag, we have cotton bags that we ship everything in. They're a little bit crispier. They're not as soft as a department store because again, we don't treat them artificially.
Right.
You wash them as you use them. They break in like a nice pair of jeans and they really start feeling more comfortable, and they do last quite a bit. We're about 4 years old. We've been testing our sheets a year before we launched to make sure of that sort of durability, and our original sheets are still out there and still working. So
wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I'm on about a 6-month cycle with mine. I'll say no matter what I do, it's 6 months, it's over, right? No, that's so cool. And you mentioned using German machines for part of your manufacturing. So you're sourcing the cotton from India, I think you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
And then you have a manufacturer in Germany, or they're just
no,
you just mean that they're imported machines from Germany?
They're imported machines. Everything's done sort of through 2 vertically integrated companies that help us source the cotton from the co-op farmers and then finish it all the way to the final stitch.
That's really cool. Yeah, it's always a big another kind of piece of variability I find, and even like kind of similar brands is people have their manufacturing set up and the logistics side of things. I don't think it's something that's talked about enough. Obviously you talk about kind of big picture of like your revenue channels that you're selling into, how you're marketing, who your ideal customer is, like obviously very important. I think of where a lot of people, the 90% of businesses that fail in their first year, especially in this space like this with apparel and things like that, I think can kind of get lost in translation is like with the manufacturing and those kind of logistical sides of things that can be challenging in their own right, but especially when you're trying to do something as sustainable in the right way like you are. So I appreciate you sharing that. I think it's really important for people to understand like all different types of successful businesses are operating that way. And I guess something I just mentioned just a second ago, I am still curious about that though, is where did you kind of get your start? Did you start kind of selling online direct to consumer and getting feedback that way? Is that still kind of your main focus, or are you more retail focused nowadays? Give me kind of a breakdown of revenue channels that you operate in these days.
We are mainly direct to consumer, and that's how we started, and that's how we continue to be. We are starting, and we have put ourselves in a position to be in a few hospitality places,
nice.
So hotels and spas, where reactive rather than proactive on this one, but we've had a few hotels and spas reach out to us, and we are now in their facilities, which has been great for not only seeing that companies are going towards that angle of making sure they have sustainable and fair trade products in their venues, but also customers being aware of that as well, and then searching for those spots to sort of stay in. So that ecotourism is being a little bit more on the forefront, and being one of the companies that's providing products to those facilities is really helpful.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I can definitely see that. I mean, it's kind of like maybe like a more like CPG food brand, like wanting to be in food service, or like, maybe like a condiment or something that's like at a table at people's favorite restaurants that they're going to turn around and try to buy it, of course, right? Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it may have been reactive, but I mean, if you're not proactive in thinking about the opportunities that could present to you, you still maybe don't follow up on it. So I think that's still pretty savvy and scrappy. I like that as an angle for this. And then I guess something as specific as this that has so many challenges with production that you've like clearly taken the time and the effort to figure out in a way that makes sense. Have you been approached with any kind of like private labeling opportunities? And is that something that you would consider going forward, or is it something you've have partnerships with this day already?
We have been approached. We have gone through lengthy negotiations on a couple of them. Nothing come to fruition yet. Again, one of the things about our product, it's a higher price point. So it makes it kind of harder to do that private label. But there have been some, I guess, celebrities and also some other institutions that have been looking for our product, and we're negotiating with them. So we're still sort of working on it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it has to make a lot of sense, especially, kind of in the early stages of a business, because you can invite like basically like brand competition if you go too hard with like, what you're producing like into private labeling too early. That's always an interesting conversation I have. I like to ask that question because there's a lot of differing opinions on that, especially at the like earlier stages of growing brands like yours. So that's interesting though. I think you have the correct and healthy perspective to it, which is just, take everything with a grain of salt. It makes sense. Not just going to say no for good out of virtue or anything else. Like, makes sense. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It's like everything in business, right?
And we're not taking it, we're not saying yes to everything either, right? I think that's important too. Like, yeah, it has to make financial sense. I think sometimes you get caught up in the whole, but it could lead to X, Y, and Z, but you're like, sometimes that doesn't happen. And you sort of put yourself in a position earlier than you should into a bad position. And then you're like, oh, right.
Yeah.
So we're going to avoid that as well.
No, I think it's good advice. Anybody who's like, new in this space or looking to get into this space, it's, it's something to consider, but ultimately I think there's other more important channels first before you consider that, unless you're just looking just to do that as a business model. It's like obviously a whole different conversation, but no, I appreciate that. I think it's good advice. It's important for people to, I think, have like nuanced perspective on that side of things, because it can be very lucrative, but it can also, put you in a bad spot, like you say, if you do it too early or too much of that in the beginning, right? So then I guess I'll ask you this. I know you mentioned you were talking to some celebrities. So as far as like different like angles that you take, like, you guys big on social media? Do you like, influencer partnerships and things like that? What's your general kind of marketing strategy, like go-to-market strategy, selling D2C like you do?
So we've done a lot of affiliate through press. So working with news outlets and magazines and writers. We've done a lot of Google search intent and Google shopping. And that's mainly been our channels for the past, 3 years. We haven't really been big on Meta or social media. We post like, once a week, maybe twice a week. So we're not big on social side of it. We're not big on the influencer side. If partnership makes sense to us, we'll work with individuals. Sometimes people buy from us and then they post and they're celebrities or they're B-list, C-list celebrities, and it kind of helps sales quite a bit. And then what we do is we'll sign them up for an affiliate relationship, if it makes sense.
No, that definitely makes sense. And this goes to show, companies had clear success like you have. You don't need to spend a bunch of money for influencers or on paid ads or anything. Like the organic growth, especially at the earlier stages, is so valuable. Then it seems like you've done quite a good job at doing things that way. And I think that organic growth and those partnerships that you forge along the way are just, they're invaluable, right? So, and then I guess I'm curious, seems like you're doing mostly D2C still to this day, which is obviously the best. You have that direct customer interaction. You can't beat that. Are you looking to get into any more like distributor or wholesale or like even like grocer relationships, or are you really just mainly focused still on D2C mostly?
Mainly focused on D2C, but we were reactive to the whole hospitality thing, but now we're starting to be a little bit more proactive again. So that's our focus. Again, we're a small team, so we have to sort of divide and conquer, but we're at a position where what are our biggest avenues for growth, and DTC and that hospitality area we see as our biggest areas for growth, and that's where we're going to concentrate.
That definitely makes sense. And one question I always love to ask everybody that comes on the podcast, if you see any of mine that get posted in the coming weeks, you'll see I do always ask this question: how did your kind of trajectory change during that time? That's like, I've heard a lot of people come on, it's like 2018 they started, do a couple of years in wholesale, and they're like, well, now we have to go back on, now we have to go online almost completely. So it's kind of like a natural pivot. But in your age of like still surely in like R&D and product development and doing all that stuff during that time, what kind of pivots did you have to make during that time while you're still like in the really, really early stages there?
Yeah, it's quite big actually, because our whole plan was to launch via in-person trade shows, right? So our big launch was going to be, there's a Green Living show out in Toronto, and that was supposed to be our launch. That was like, let's go out there and get 10,000 emails so that we can capture demand and sell some product while we're there. And all those shows were canceled, right? So we had to we took a step back. We did start sort of on a digital front with Facebook, and we did do a few influencer relationships to help us initially get off the sort of launch pad. But our first few sales came from an in-person event we did at a bank, right? Like, it's just, the in-person thing is really big because people want to touch and feel things. It's on our mind to see like, how can we do that? But yeah, it initial launch having COVID really affected the way we want to launch, and we just had to shift and pivot and go to digital first.
Right. You went to digital first, but it seems like you're still like waiting for that time where you could go back and like execute on your initial plan. It sounds like, which ultimately seemed like a good move. So
yeah, we still want to do that, but the shows are still haven't come back to the way they used to be. So we're, we've tried a couple, but we need to see what happens over the next few years. Yeah,
this is interesting. And yeah, back to my original always ask question. I just always love to ask, from 2020, obviously 4 years in now, had to make pivots through COVID, make some changes. So if you go back to 2020, like kind of the inception and launch of the brand, if you give yourself a piece of advice, if you can go back then, whether it's personal, business, or whatever it might be, what would that one piece of advice be, do you think, if you can give it to yourself back then?
I think the one piece would be focus, one thing, and then run with it, pour gas on it. What we ended up doing is, we had our sheets, we had the towels. After we launched the first year, things were going well. We're like, okay, let's introduce baby products. Let's introduce blankets. Let's introduce, all these other things. And we kind of ended up spreading ourselves a little bit too thin. And then we had to sort of like, it was harder to get going and harder to advertise like 5 different product lines versus 1 or 2.
Right.
So I think if I was to go back, it'd be just focus. And as you start getting traction, just start pouring fuel on that fire and go with it. So that's my one piece of advice to any entrepreneur starting out right now, is to concentrate on like the least amount of SKUs as possible to get sort of traction for yourself, and then pour fuel on it.
It's so true, because there's a more like general marketing sentiment is just like, trying to appeal to everybody, you appeal to nobody. You can do that with your marketing messaging. You can do that with your SKUs. Like if you have 100 SKUs that every person at every age could buy, it's not really going to appeal to anybody. It's just like, exactly. You're spread too thin, and your message is spread too thin with your resources. I think that's really good advice for anybody starting out, because it may seem like the natural course with when you have early successes to expand horizontally. But I think my point of, just doubling down and pouring fuel on the fire of things you have already found success, you can continue to refine, is really good advice, especially in the early stage. I appreciate that answer. And it's actually a quite unique one. One of the most common answers I get to that question, hilariously, is just don't do it, which is always followed up by, no, of course not. It's like, it's a labor of love, but it's my whole life and I love it. I would never do anything different. But I think the off the cuff answer for a lot of people is like, just stick with your job. But I think it's even still a really valuable perspective for people, even like jokingly, to hear that, because I mean, everybody feels that way at some point, I think, especially in the early journey of a venture business. It's everybody gets that feeling for sure. And it's okay to feel that way. You see people still love what they do. They still love the brand. They're still having success. So
it's a roller coaster.
It maybe a laugh.
It's a roller coaster ride. It definitely one of those things where like some months you're like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. And other months like, what did I just do? I
was on other pods, but I don't know if you've ever seen I believe it was Jim Carrey giving a speech at his alma mater talking about his father, who wanted to be a comedian but just stuck with his job for the sake of the family. And one of my favorite quotes ever was him saying, you could easily fail at what you don't want to do, so you might as well take a chance doing what you love. That always drove me, and it's kind of like emulated in a lot of the conversations I have on here. People say, you could get laid off from your job out of nowhere too. You see that now. It's like, you think you're in a sure thing in the secure position. Might not be. Another COVID happens, another big round of layoffs happen. You never know what could happen. So you might as well take the chance to do something you want to do, right? I just want to say thank you again for coming on. I appreciate all of your insights. I love what you're doing. I think it opens the door for, a lot of other, like-minded people to, take the efforts and maybe the extra time and even a little bit extra money to, do the right things and, be sustainable and continue to open the door more and more for others to come along. So appreciate what you're doing. I love your passion, and I wish you nothing but continued luck and success, my friend.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Matt. And I appreciate everything you guys are doing as well. I think it's important to hear other entrepreneur stories, whether it be struggles or successes, because it's a lonely game sometimes, right? So it's important to have people out there and to know that there's other people out there going through the same thing as you are. Appreciate what you guys are doing as well.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate that. Well, thank you again, sir. And thanks a lot, everybody. See you next time.